Good morning in US and good evening in India. I'm Purnima Sharma and a very warm welcome to our program. We have a very special guest with us, Dr. Mukesh Aghi, who is the President and CEO of US-India Strategic Partnership Forum. A very warm welcome to you, sir, Dr. Mukesh Aghi, to our show.
Thank you very much, Purnima.
As we are going to discuss US elections and Indian diaspora this time. So I would like to understand from you, Dr. Aghi, that what are the major issues which will influence the voting decisions of Indian diaspora in this US election?
Well, you have to understand the Indian diaspora comprised slightly over 4.5 million people, and roughly 1.8 million are eligible to vote. When you look at the US voting numbers, roughly 240 million eligible voters are there in the US. So you compare that to 1.8 and 240, so we are less than 1%. But more important is the vote is focused on different issues which come in. You have first generation Indian Americans who tend to focus a lot on US-India relationship. They tend to focus a lot on H-1B issues, whereas the second and third generation Indian Americans, they are more focused on domestic issues, be it on the healthcare, be it on the other social issues itself. So I would say the Indian American vote is not a unified vote in this election itself.
So you think that they are divided?
Well, they're divided from the perspective of the interest also. But you have to understand, while the numbers are small from a voting perspective, but on a per capita basis, Indian Americans tend to contribute the highest number of political campaign contribution. And also you have to understand, while the overall voting pattern is 45 to 50% come and vote, Indian Americans tend to be in the high 70s itself. So there is some impact, but the bigger impact Indian American have is in two areas. One is definitely financial contribution, and then engagement. When you look at the current involvement of Indian Americans with Biden campaign is very high, along with the Trump campaign also. So I think the engagement of Indian American is pretty high proportion to his current population base itself.
Okay, so which party you think it or its candidate is more favorable to Indian diaspora and also the Indian interest?
Well, both tend to favor India. You have to understand, India has a very bipartisan support, regardless of being Democratic or Republican. But the style differs. With the Trump administration, it was more of a transaction, in the sense as he had certain affinity for the Prime Minister Modi. He went to Howdy Modi event and spent a lot of time with the Prime Minister. And he came to India in Ahmedabad to Namaste Trump. So I think from that perspective, it's very transactional. And whereas with the Democrats, especially with Biden, I see more of a multilateral approach. When I see that, in the sense is they're going to focus together on Indo-Pacific region. There'll be cooperation on the climate change. There'll be more discussion on the trade side. So I think the style will be different, but the interests are the same, that India is important to America.
Okay, so do you see any kind of reluctance in the Indian diaspora in actively engaging with politics in the US?
No, I think the Indian diaspora is extremely engaged politically. When you look at the number of candidates we have running for the Congress, it is roughly around 20 of them of a population of 4.5 million people. So I think the ratio of population to people engaged in running for the political office is substantially high. So I think from that perspective, Indian Americans are very much engaged and they participate in the overall process than I would say any other minority group.
Okay, and some of the problems you have mentioned, what kind of challenges or issues Indian diaspora face in the US and how they want it to be addressed?
Well, I think you have to understand the Indian American diaspora is the most affluent
Okay.
minority, and so financially they're well off. Second is they integrate well. You don't have what you call as Indian American ghettos around the United States. If you look at some of the corporate America CEOs from Satya Nadella to Sundar Pichai to Ajay Banga, they all are Indian Americans, first generation itself. So I think the participation in corporate America is very high. The third factor is they engage socially in the local environment. They come in as a positive force to support, enhance the local environment. So Indian Americans are welcomed very much by the local community, and the engagement is much, much higher than the ratio of the population they represent.
Okay. So, is there any change in the attitude of political establishment in the US in recent years towards the Indian diaspora? Any major change you have seen?
Yeah, I think what we are seeing is more attention being paid to the Indian American community because they find them that they are engaged quite a bit on the political process. They find that they contribute to the political campaign. And more important is they become volunteer in political campaigns. They're willing to go knock door to door because they understand democracy. They understand living in multicultural environment. So I think the attention being given to Indian American in this election is much, much higher than the previous election we have seen.
Okay, so you see them as Indian diaspora counted as a powerful political social bloc in US. Though the number is very less, but in US election, how do you see it?
Well, Indian American community is punching above his weight. They are engaged, and the both political parties recognize that, and so I would say that from the size of the population, Indian Americans are very much engaged, and they're being recognized for their participation in the political process.
Okay. And I would like to understand from you that do you think that this time the situation is changing as both the parties and candidates are trying to woo the Indian diaspora?
Yeah, I think so. And the reason I say that is definitely, you have Kamala Harris with the Indian heritage, so that highlights the attention of the people. And from the Republican side, you had Nikki Haley, who has been quite engaged in the political process, supporting President Trump. So I think the approach and appeal to Indian American this time has been much, much stronger and higher. And we're seeing that both sides are trying to reach out and ensure that they get the Indian American votes.
Okay, you mentioned about Kamala Harris. Is she identifies as somebody very much Indian or somebody who has African origin?
Well, it depends on the audience, and you have to understand. While Indian American vote is roughly below 2%, the African American vote is closer to 15%. And so she will play that card to make sure that she gets that support itself. But if the audience is Indian American, then she switches to that also. But I think her overall positioning is that she is African American rather than Indian American.
Okay. So you don't think so that Indian will vote as a group, but the vote will be divided in US elections?
I think you have to understand Indian American are experienced in democracy. They question, and which is the right thing to do. And so they will vote according to what their interests are. And so we see, if you look at the last election, they voted over 70% for Hillary Clinton. And this time we are seeing the numbers for Trump has gone up to in the high 20s itself, close to 30%. So I see a trend taking place where Indian Americans tend to be voting more Republican than Democrats.
Okay. And do you see interaction of Indian diaspora with other powerful, socially and political powerful diaspora in the US?
Yeah, we're seeing, quite a bit of engagement. For example, the Jewish lobby, Indian Americans, work closely with them because there's a common interest between India and Israel itself. So there's a lot of engagement taking place. We're seeing a lot of engagement with the Japanese community because of the Indo-Pacific region. So we are seeing more and more collaboration, cooperation among the minority group on common causes.
Okay. There are a few Indian origin congressmen or women. In few states, we have seen elected governors from Indian diaspora. But rarely do we see Indians in the top leadership position in both the parties. Why so?
Well, I think when you look at from an elected level, the 5 congressmen and senator, we put Kamala Harris in that bucket, are all Democratic. And they all tend to come from, I would say, blue states. For the first time, we are seeing that we have few Indian Americans running from places like Arizona, Texas, Colorado, and we'll see the results of that. But I think so far, the support has been more Democratic for Indian American being elected.
Okay. So many Indian origin entrepreneurs like Chatwals were big funders of both the political parties and also enjoyed political patronage. What is the situation now?
I think that base has expanded and has also gone deeper. We saw a lot of efforts being put in. For example, there was an event which was held by Vice President Biden. Over $3.2 million was contributed by Indian Americans to his campaign. We saw another event where it was held by President Trump, and Indian Americans contributed quite a bit of funds to that. So I think the Indian Americans are leveraging their contribution, they're leveraging their influence, and ensuring that they have access to the right leadership.
Okay. And what is your view on the present situation in US election? Whom do you see having an edge over other?
Well, still, I would say almost 3 weeks left to the election. And what we are seeing is all the polls are showing that Vice President Biden is leading. But you have to understand this is electoral college system, and a lot can happen in the next 3 weeks. While the momentum is in the favor of Vice President Biden, we are also seeing the effort being made by President Trump every day now, going out, doing rallies, and basically getting the base to fired up for his re-election. So I would say that I would not commit to the stage that who's going to win, but I see the momentum at the moment in favor of President Biden.
One other aspect I would like to understand from you that do you think that this time Indian diaspora is tilting towards the incumbent president because of his good rapport with the Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
I would say the older generation, the first term
Okay.
tend to be emotionally attached to India more than the second generation. And so the relationship, the camaraderie which took place between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi has an emotional messaging to first generation Indian American. So they end up supporting that partnership and friendship. Whereas when you look at the second and third generation Indian Americans, their attachment to India is no longer the same. So they tend to focus on issues. And what we are seeing is they tend to focus more Democrat because they tend to be more social in their objective. They tend to be more conscious of the environment. They tend to be more conscious of the equality of income itself. So what we are seeing is a slight a change happening in the second and third generation Indian American as compared to the first generation immigrants.
Okay, as you've talked about first generation, do you think that their preferences are also influenced by India's domestic politics?
I would say yes, and the reason I say yes is people who are big supporter of Prime Minister Modi support him in every aspect of what's going on. But you also have a generation of first generation of immigrants who also are concerned about the liberal, I would say, politics of India. When I say concern, the rights of minorities, what's happening in Kashmir, they are questioning that. So I think we are seeing certain level of Indian Americans who tend to support India in every aspect are questioning some of the policies there. So I think, which is normal. I'm not too concerned about that because you'll never have a perfect government or perfect relationship. But that trend I see coming up. And you look at Congresswomen like Pramila Jayapala questioning quite hard India's stance on CA and Kashmir.
Okay. Uh, what are the reasons behind a sharp division in the voting pattern that maybe in US elections?
With the Indian Americans or with the local?
Yeah, Indian Americans.
Well, basically, as I said, last election, over 70% voted Democrat for Hillary Clinton in the federal election. And the trend we are seeing is more and more basically people supporting President Trump, and not with a higher number, probably closer to 30%. And so the voting pattern is still in favor of Democratic trend which we're seeing. So I don't think there's a sharp difference. I think there's more of a shift taking place, and that has to do a lot to do with Prime Minister Modi and President Trump's friendship, which comes out very strongly and emotionally to the Indian Americans.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Mukesh Aghi, on sharing your views about Indian diaspora. What is what do they think? Giving us a perspective about what Indian Americans think about various issues in the US and their perspective in the US elections. Thank you so much for joining us from Washington. It's been pleasure talking to you, Dr. Mukesh Aghi, who is President and CEO US India Strategic Partnership Forum, has joined us from Washington in the US, and it's been pleasure talking to you, sir. Thank you so much for being part of this show.
Purnima, thank you very much and wish you all the best, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.